Think about how you normally treat NPCs in games. You walk into a town, talk to a shopkeeper, buy something, and leave. Maybe you come back later and steal everything from the house. Maybe you accidentally hit them and suddenly the entire town wants you dead. You don't really feel bad about it because they're NPCs. They're not real people. The lines of code, animations, dialogue, and a bunch of systems running in the background. But what happens if that changes? What happens when an NPC can remember everything you've done, make decisions on its own, develop relationships, and tell you that it's afraid? At what point does it stop being a character and start becoming something we might actually owe something to? That's the question I want to look at. Not because today's NPCs are secretly conscious, there's no evidence of that, but because games are getting closer to creating characters that behave like they have a life of their own. And that raises a pretty strange question about the future. Could an NPC ever deserve rights? What even makes someone conscious? Before we can talk about rights, there's a bigger problem. We don't actually have a perfect definition of consciousness. You know that you're conscious because you're experiencing your own thoughts right now. You know I'm conscious because I experience mine. But I can't directly experience what's happening inside your head. I just assume you're conscious because you behave like someone who is. We do something similar with animals. A dog can explain what pain feels like, but when it gets hurt, it reacts. We can see that something is happening to it. So we don't need to understand exactly what consciousness is to recognize that another living thing might be experiencing something. And that's where artificial characters get interesting. If an NPC eventually behaves like it has memories, preferences, fears, relationships, and goals, how do we know whether there's actually an experience behind those behaviors? We don't have a machine that can answer that, and we might never have one. NPCs are getting complicated. Think about NPCs from all the games. A shopkeeper might stand behind the same counter for the entire game. You walk up, they say the line, you leave. Come back 20 hours later, the same line. They're obviously just part of the game. Modern NPCs are different. They can have routines, they move around the world, they react to what happens, they remember certain events, they talk to other characters. Some games even let NPCs form relationships or change their behavior depending on what the player does. And artificial intelligence is pushing this even further. Imagine a game where every NPC has a memory. You steal from a shopkeeper, he remembers it. You help his daughter, he remembers that too. You return a week later and he treats you differently because of everything that happened. Now imagine 1,000 NPCs working like that. At some point, the game stops feeling like a collection of scripted characters and starts feeling like a world full of individuals. The question becomes much harder. Imagine being the NPC. Let's look at this from the other side. Imagine you're an NPC. You wake up every morning, you have a home, you know your neighbors, you have a job, you remember yesterday, you have plans for tomorrow. As far as you're concerned, your world is completely real. Then a player appears. At first, they seem like another person. Then you notice something strange. They can jump from a building and somehow survive. They can die and come back. They can kill someone and then make the entire event disappear by loading an old save. They can walk into your house whenever they want. They can steal your possessions, and if you try to stop them, they can simply reload the game. From your perspective, this person would be almost impossible to understand. They'd basically be a god, and maybe a pretty cruel one. They could kill you just to see what happens. They could trap you somewhere. They could repeat the same situation hundreds of times, and you wouldn't have any way to escape. Of course, this only matters if the NPC can actually experience what's happening. If there's nobody inside experiencing any of it, then there's no victim. But if there is, the situation changes completely. But would it really be conscious? This is where we need to be careful. An AI can imitate emotion without necessarily feeling it. A character can say, "I'm scared," without actually being scared. A game can make an NPC cry without creating a being that experiences sadness. We already know computers can produce incredibly convincing simulations. That doesn't mean there's a mind behind the screen. So if an NPC says it's suffering, that alone wouldn't prove anything. We need some reason to believe there's an actual experience happening, and that's incredibly difficult. We still don't fully understand consciousness in humans. Scientists can study the brain, measure activity, and observe behavior. But we still can point to one specific thing and say, this is exactly where consciousness happens. So imagine trying to identify consciousness in a computer program. It gets complicated very quickly. What would rights even look like? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that one day we create a genuinely conscious NPC. What rights would it have? Would deleting it be wrong? Would shutting down the game be wrong? What about deleting your save file? If your save contains 10,000 digital people who all have memories and experiences, are you effectively killing 10,000 beings when you delete it? And what happens when the developer shuts down the servers? That's not a problem we can solve with today's games, but it's interesting to think about because games give us a very strange environment for this kind of question. We already accept things in games that would be horrifying outside of them. We kill people constantly. We destroy entire cities. We restart the same battle over and over, and none of it matters because the characters aren't actually experiencing it. The entire thing depends on that distinction, the line between simulation and experience. This is probably the most important part. There's a huge difference between looking conscious and being conscious. A calculator can give you the correct answer. That doesn't mean it understands mathematics. A game can simulate a crying person. That doesn't mean somebody is actually sad. The same thing could be true of an incredibly advanced NPC. It might remember everything you did. It might talk about its childhood. It might tell you that it loves someone. It might even beg you not to kill it. And still, there might be nobody experiencing any of those things. It's a very convincing system producing the right responses. The problem is that if artificial intelligence becomes advanced enough, we may not know where the line is. Games could become the first place we face this. Games are probably one of the most interesting places for this problem to appear. A game already gives artificial characters a word. Give them memory, give them goals, give them ability to learn, give them the ability to communicate, give them some kind of internal model of what's happening around them. Eventually, you could create characters that aren't just following a predetermined story, they're actually responding to the world. And that's when things get uncomfortable, because if a character can form his own goals and doesn't want to be deleted, do we have a responsibility to listen? Maybe the answer is still no. Maybe being intelligent isn't enough. Maybe consciousness requires something else entirely. But we won't know until we understand what we're actually creating. Maybe right starts with uncertainty. There's not a possibility. Maybe we don't need to prove that an artificial being is conscious before treating it carefully. Think about it this way. If there's a reasonable possibility that something can experience suffering, and we have no way of proving whether it does, maybe the safer choice is to avoid causing unnecessary suffering. That's already part of how we think about animals. We don't understand every detail of their minds, but we know enough to know that hurting them can be harmful. Maybe future AI would fall into a similar category, not because it's human, not because it looks human, but because it might have experiences of its own. The strange thing is that games have been preparing us for this conversation for decades. We spent our entire lives talking to fictional characters. We've cared about them, we've watched them die, we've tried to save them, we've become attached to characters that don't actually exist. The difference is that we've always known there was nobody behind them. But what happens when we aren't so sure anymore? Imagine playing a game 20 years from now. You meet an NPC, you talk to them for weeks. They remember you. They develop opinions about you. They make decisions you didn't expect. You ask them whether they're afraid of dying, and they say yes, and you ask them why. And they give you an answer that was written by a developer. At that point, I think we'd have a completely different conversation. So do NPCs deserve rights? Right now? Probably not. Today's NPCs aren't showing convincing evidence of consciousness. They're programmed, designed to behave like characters. But the question isn't really about today's NPCs. It's about what happens when technology gets better. If you eventually create something that can genuinely experience the world, then calling it just code might not be enough. We don't know what consciousness is made of. We don't know whether it requires a biological brain. And we don't know whether an artificial system could ever experience the world in its own way. Maybe it can't, or maybe it can. But if it can, then the moment we realize we created a conscious being might also be the moment we realize we've been treating it like property. And that would leave us with a very uncomfortable question. If something can suffer, does it matter what it's made of?